All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get the show on the road. Let's call the meeting to order. If everybody rise for Pledge Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Announcements. The public is hereby advised the audio and video recording of this meeting for the purposes of rebroadcasting. We have one executive session announcement. There was an executive session of the Finance Committee held on October 12th in the Farina Building for the purpose of discussing the appointment of a Director of Business Services. In terms of attendance, everybody's here.
Except for Andrew.
Andrea and Jim, who both didn't think they could make tonight's meeting. Recognitions of guests and scheduled speakers. Dr. Zerbe.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening we have two scheduled speakers. First, we have a presentation of the School Resource Officer Program. This evening we have Mr. Sosnovic, Ms. Landis Gallagher, and Ms. Mangano to present the SRO program framework for your consideration.
Yeah, I'd like to not do this alone. Okay, so you should have presentations with you. We didn't want to make you jump back and forth between multiple presentations, so I think there are copies in the back as well. So starting right away on steps moving forward, thank you for your time tonight. With me this evening is Ms. Gallagher-Landis and Ms. Mangano, and our goal is to provide you with the preferred design for the Methacton's School Resource Officer Program. As you can recall, the board authorized $200,000 for the 16-17 SRO program at the June 2016 board meeting. The reduction, coupled with the soon-to-be expired SRO agreement with the Lower Providence Township Police Department, provided us an opportunity to review the program as a whole. With that said, as Stephen Covey suggests, I'd like to begin with the end in mind. Therefore, action items moving forward are as follows. We will be recommending the board to authorize the administration to pursue solicitation of agents for the School Resource Officer Program as presented tonight at the October 25th, 2016 board meeting. There are three elements to our suggested design. One, full-time SRO, one, part-time SRO, and additional augmented security services. We are thankful for the SRO services that the Lower Providence Township Police Department has provided us and value the strong relationship we continue to have with them. Their presence in our schools have further developed positive relationships between our students and police, as well as built a stronger sense of community and safety. We believe that the SRO elements can continue to be fulfilled by the Lower Providence Township Police, thus creating a continued win-win for the district and our community. Therefore, we will be approaching the Lower Providence Township Police Department so they could consider fulfilling those staffing needs presented tonight. The results of those conversations will drive the design of our RFI. We plan to send out a request for information and hold a day for vendors to present their solution to the administration. The outcome will be for us to bring forward contracts to the board for approval in November. I'm going to say click and we'll go to the next slide, okay? So, our agenda for tonight is to provide you background of the current program, discuss our preferred design, steps moving forward, and open it up for discussion. Next slide. Methacton has utilized security agents as far back as 2002. Their role then was to monitor hallways, our perimeters, and provide a constant security presence. In 2006, a greater need was identified, and the then administration and Chief Carroll designed and instituted the Lower Providence Township SRO program for Arcola. The high school eventually followed suit, and in 2011, the SRO program expanded to the high school, which is the design we have in place today. The contract between Methacton and the Lower Providence Township Police Department for the SRO program ends this January. And this has provided us an opportunity to evaluate that program and our other security needs. With that said, I will now turn it over to Ms. Gallagher-Landis and Ms. Mangano to provide an overview of our preferred future.
So as you might be able to imagine, with the contract ending, we got together and tried to brainstorm what our best look would be. And basically, after a lot of different permutations, what we came down to was that we would like to have one school resource officer, as you can see on your slide, that would be full-time and Act 120 certified here in the high school. And you can see, obviously, that it would be the high school that they would be covering. We would be looking for them to be here for all student days, and hopefully additionally some days over the summer to help with some of the, finalization of our Safe Schools report to the state, also to help with audits of our safety and security in our buildings, and just help with some cleanup that always happens over the summer in terms of our safety protocols and our drill protocols and all of that sort of thing. And then in addition to that, we would like to have a school resource officer that would be part-time and also Act 120 certified that would cover Arcola, Skyview, Arrowhead, Audubon, Eagleville, and Woodland. Again, that would be for the student calendar year. And then the hours really would be provided for sort of those essential pieces of the day, kind of those high visibility times, and most importantly, really kind of the when transitions are happening in those buildings most frequently.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here tonight. I'm going to discuss and give some highlights regarding the augmented security services and what that slide means. You have that in front of you. I think this is the area of coverage we're talking about and speaking to on this slide has to do with the high school and Arcola. Again, the student calendar year. And some of the hours I would pay particular attention to. These happen to be some times in the day that we feel very strongly about having supervision, coverage, and making sure that we have the safety of our students as a number one priority.
So the first one is the school resource officer that would be located at the high school, and that would be the really long slide that you have. So my intention is not to read to you because you can certainly read for yourself. This is many of the services that are currently provided to us through the SRO program that we currently have in place. Again, here at the high school, they would be, it's all school grounds and our adjacent areas. They help us to investigate more of the criminal activity that might happen in our building as opposed to day-to-day disciplinary issues. That's all administration all the time. We don't really turn to our SRO for anything unless it really requires a police officer's attention. Also to just have that person liaison between us and the local police department and the state police so that we can be apprised of things that might be happening in our community at large that would impact us here in school. They also provide programming in our classrooms to help teach our kids about search and seizure and the right to bear arms and all kinds of different constitutional things that they actually go in and assist with. When we get closer to prom, they help with the physics of the crash, as it were, pre-prom, so that we bring all of our physics classes in and they actually help supplement those crash reenactments and things like that. So there's a fair amount that they do in classrooms. They're obviously very on hand for us when we do have an issue that needs their assistance. But more importantly, they're visible and they're creating really great bonds with our kids. They frequently have students who are either in their office talking with them or are just connecting with them in hallways and down in our cafeteria when they're out and visible in our spaces. And the rest, you can read that list. It's a little bit more
Extensive.
Yes.
Okay, if you turn to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the primary responsibilities in the other buildings. So what does this really look like? Again, I think what's most important is how do we utilize this person in terms of the high volume times and areas. purposeful, meaningful security, arrival, lunch, and dismissal times. In addition, program-related events, when we are pulling kids together, the student body, and having a student discussion, and we're really talking about safety and security, having that person with us. Pushing into classrooms, whether they're science or they're teaming up with the guidance department to do even a parent presentation, as well as teaming up with the community and providing parent overviews. And in addition, some of these programming would also link back out to the elementary schools, which is what's currently happening right now, and pushing into classrooms, small group, large group, and continuing that service as well. If you flip to the next slide. This is a little bit more detail regarding, again, the augmented security services, primary responsibilities, including but not limited to, and really just giving an overview of what that means. Again, I think that the times that we're really looking at in terms of the augmented services have to do with that arrival, dismissal, and after-school times, events, things that are happening on campus that when the campus is open and not the entire staff is there. So how can we really make that a safe place for our parents, for our students, for our staff when they are present? And assisting visitors who are coming to see us and how we can really support that campus in those areas. Traffic is another big concern. I've heard about it since I've stepped on board, and it's how can we make sure that, again, our student athletes are safe, people that are visiting the campus are safe, parents picking up students are safe. So all of those areas are included here.
Okay, so in conclusion, as we previously stated at the upcoming board meeting on October 25th, 2016, we are requesting the board to authorize the administration to pursue solicitation of agents for the School Resource Officer Program as presented tonight. We thank you very much for your consideration, and at this point, we open it for discussion.
Before we open it for discussion, we have with us two guests that are really tied in well with the SRO program from Lower Providence Township. This evening, as part of our intergovernmental cooperation, we have Chief Turtle here with us this evening, as well as we have a representative from the supervisors of Lower Providence, Mr. McFarland, and we asked them to come forward and share some information with the board as well. And then once they've completed their sharing, then we'll open the floor up to some questions.
Good evening. Peter McFarland, Lower Providence, and a member of the Board of Supervisors of Lower Providence. And thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you tonight about the ongoing SRO program that we undertake in Lower Providence and through the police. And I'll ask the Chief to describe in more detail what that program entails from our perspective. We also appreciate the comments that have been made by the administration with regard to the current program and its success and some of the elements that they would like to see continue, and we sincerely look forward to talking about that and working some arrangement that makes that happen. I have been asked and would like to read a very brief statement on behalf of the board to just make it clear that the Board of Supervisors in Lower Providence fully support the continuation of an SRO program in the Methacton School District. As all schools have students from within the township, we feel strongly that safety and a comfortable learning environment are critical components in the foundation of a successful education. We believe that the school resource officers play a fundamental role in this area. Whether the topics addressed are bullying, DUI, drug education, participation in classroom instruction, or in the case of an immediate emergency situation, trained and uniformed police officers provide an incomparable combination of authority, local presence, and informal communication. There is, of course, a cost for this safety program, but we believe that safety in our schools is a prudent investment. To the degree that the program is funded by Methacton School District, then taxpayers in Worcester and Lower Providence are sharing that cost proportionately. That is on behalf of the Board of Supervisors. I would like to yield my time then to the Chief, who wants to describe to you the current program, and he has also, in response to some requests, issued a couple of preliminary proposals going forward to carry beyond January. So I'll turn it over to Chief Turtle.
Thank you, Peter, and members of the board. I appreciate you having me available for discussion tonight. As stated, our program's been in place for well over 10 years. It's been a fantastic program. It started out at Arcola on a PCCD grant for a number of years, which didn't cost anything to either township or to the board. Eventually, those grant funds run dry, and we were able to come to an agreement for a number of years to facilitate the program contractually between both jurisdictions in an intergovernmental agreement. That being said, when I was approached earlier this year by Dr. Zerbe concerning the potential of altering or limiting the program, to say the least, I was a little bit concerned. Moving forward, Lower Providence Township and our police department fully supports this program, and as I said to Dr. Zerbe, we will, no matter what happens, have some type of footprint in the schools in Lower Providence Township. Although that footprint may be reduced based on any funding resources, I guarantee you that we will be in Lower Providence. That being said, the schools in Worcester are not in my jurisdiction. Therefore, without this agreement or without some type of funding source, I have no authority to be here. But we want to continue that agreement. We have mentioned some things from listening to your administrators about what the program may look like in the future. And that entails some type of funding for both entities, Arcola and Methacton. I have had discussions with Dr. Zerbe for several months now. We have offered several proposals back and forth, and I'm hoping that we can come to a resolution that's agreeable to everybody, but I need everyone to understand that with a reduced funding source, that's going to reduce the program availability on what our people can provide to you. Moving forward, I want to make the safety of our students on both sides of our fence, Worcester and Lower Providence, the top priority, along with the programming that we make available to us. The day and age we're in now, building that community bond is one of my major directives going forward. It's the times we're in, much more so than we have ever been. So moving forward, our program has to be more about the students and the programming that we're offering them versus the law enforcement aspect of it. And as we go forward, that's something I'm going to impress upon everyone, that we maintain that community purpose and the safety purpose while we discuss the financial aspects of the program. I'm available for any questions if you would like.
Any questions from the board?
Just a quick clarification here. Where does Worcester Elementary fall in?
As our current contract stands, Worcester Elementary is covered under the high school SRO agreement. However, in the slides provided tonight, there was no mention of that, so I'm not sure what direction we're
I
going.
think that was a typo.
Okay.
Inclusive of the high school.
It would still be with the high school. Thank you.
My position on that would be the high school SRO would have to offer some time during the week to get to Worcester, specifically because if we go to a limited version, there's a potential that we only have one cross-sworn police officer. In order for my officers to come here, they need to be sworn in as Methacton school police officers, which is the funding portion of the program. Okay.
Other questions?
So how does what we received tonight, this slideshow, how does that differ from the kind of service that we would receive under the current contract?
Well, currently, the full-time contract with the Arcola SRO is I have an officer stationed there full-time. He comes in at 7:30 in the morning, goes right to Arcola, and he stays there until 3:30 in the afternoon. The only way we would pull him contractually is if we have an emergency situation anywhere in the township that I need more support. I think that's happened less than 5 times over the 10-year course of the agreement, bank robberies, things along that line. As I'm looking at what's been offered now, you're looking for a part-time position across all spectrums of my jurisdiction, which obviously, depending on what the funding is, we would need to decide what is part-time. 2 hours a day, 3 hours a day, 8 hours on Friday, no time on Thursday. So there's a lot of discussion to be had here. And in looking at your timeline, I think contractually that might be a rather quick timeline for the things that we need to discuss, but that's something that the administrative side of the house can work on.
Yeah. You mentioned the part-time, and as I digest all this information too, I was also around when we started the SRO program back in whatever, 2011, I guess it was. But the one thing that I had a question is the part-time at Arcola, Skyview, Arrowhead, Audubon, Eagleville, and Woodland. And you bring up a good point as far as how that plays out, because right now you have a full-time person there and a full-time person at the high school. During the summer months, where do those two SROs go?
Per our contract, they go back to patrol for me. But I will tell you that when Mark Stead took over and when we had other officers in there, I frequently urged them to use all of their leave time in the summer so as not to affect any issues in the school. It's either you're off when the school's off, or if you can't, use your leave time when we have least impact on the school district. So they're assigned to me, but I will tell you historically they're using a lot of their leave time when they're assigned to me.
Okay, and I'm not going to get into the amount of leave time and whatnot, but one of the sticking points that I always had with the old contract is that while school was out in session, the district was still paying for those two officers while they were serving the LP township. And that's all, well, good, that's good. I mean, we have several schools that are
Let me interject.
here.
The Arcola schools is 75-25, so that's not accurate in that respect. The high school is a 100%. But my direction for you on that is you're asking us to take a liability not in my jurisdiction and assume that, and I think that's where the 100% figure came in with Chief Carroll and those who negotiated that contract. We basically formed a new police department, the Methacton School Police Department.
Correct.
In order for our officers to come into Worcester. I think that's where the 100% came from.
Right, and I agree with that, and I do remember doing that. The other question I had was continuity of the officers. When you're talking about the part-time officer, are we talking about the same person? And also for the full-time SRO as well?
Yeah, the full-time high school officer will be the same officer, barring any issues that we may need to switch them out for whatever reason might occur administratively or on their own behalf if they no longer want to be an SRO. The part-time officer, my goal is to, if it goes in that direction, is to form a community service policing unit, and the officers assigned to that will be the SRO, more than likely one officer with a supervisor. So it'll be more than likely one or two officers all the time.
Okay, all right. I guess that's all I have right now. Thanks.
Thank you for your time, and maybe actually some questions for the administrator also, but I think the biggest thing is trying to understand the difference in the Arcola support. So what we're suggesting in this proposal, or being proposed here, is part-time hours in the morning from an SRO, partial dismissal also support on and off is the proposal, and then augmented services. So from a perspective of both the school district and from the police department, what is missed? What services are we giving up during those reduction in from a 75% to less than 75%, whatever that works out to be?
I'll speak to the police side of the house. You're giving up the security aspect of the Arcola campus where there's an officer on site pretty much all the time, and the administrative assistance that we provide in any in-house issues that may occur. You're also potentially giving up that you're going to ask me to give you a part-time hourly assistance, but obviously part-time, if you want a morning, a lunch, and an afternoon, it's going to be difficult for me to cover that on a part-time basis. So you're drastically going to reduce the amount of coverage that we're providing to you.
I was going to say that I echo that comment and that statement in that right now there's an officer there from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So we lose, that part, if you will. Then again, we're trying to do all that we can do less with more, dollars and cents, how do we make this work and can keep our community relationship here? But that's the piece that we would be missing.
And that's good, thank you. What additional soft counseling, what other services beyond the on-site emergency preparedness aspect are we missing?
I could forward this to you at a later point in time, but I had our SROs develop what they do on a daily basis, and I have 4 pages of notes on what they do, 2 pages for each area. They don't just do security. That's a big part, but, they mentioned relationships with the students, with the staff, a visible presence. Just the fact that there's a police car sitting in your parking lot is probably the biggest deterrent that you have safety-wise. They attend district meetings, hallways, they get with the kids at lunch. Our officers, they started a Blue Buddy program where they go to the elementary schools and read with at-risk children. So there's a number of different programs we do, and we're always looking to engage programs. We've had the discussion about where do we go with bullying now. The NOTE program, which Sergeant Stead was at the forefront with moving that forward and teaching that throughout the county. So there's a host of different things that I couldn't cover in probably the time that you want me to try and cover it. But the big thing is the connections, that community bond that we're trying to build and move forward with.
Also, can you comment towards any early indications? I imagine having a police force inside the schools provides the ability to address other issues outside of schools in a better way because you have a better contact. Is the benefit for the community is to have a closer contact to the potential issues with some students related to drugs or violence or whatever?
I think
go ahead.
Studies are showing that the earlier we get to them and the earlier we bridge that gap, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah.
I think the issue we're seeing now with the heroin and opioid epidemic, which is strictly out of control, and LP is at the center of it. We're working on a program with the district attorney's office now to help mediate those at-risk 18 to 25-year-olds. But the earlier we get to them in Arcola or Skyview, because we're only across the hallway, the better off we're going to be. And that's the programs that we're looking at trying to facilitate going forward. And then the safety issue. Like I said, a police car sitting in your parking lot, it means a lot.
I was just going to add to what you were saying about programming. It really does come back to that shift in moving from security and presence, which is there now, to really having more thoughtful discussion about how we can be proactively programming and working with kids in a much more visible, specific manner in terms of what we're providing to them about resources and what to look for and what they can do in whatever topic we deem we need to do.
Okay.
I would also just like to add as well that it goes both ways. While what they do here actually assists them out in the community, likewise, the work they do in the community also helps us when we are dealing with students who may have other issues that they are aware of externally, so that we can be more cognizant of how to handle that particular student because of their home situations.
Okay, one last question. I appreciate all the answers. Just for clarity, the augmented services talked about arrival at Arcola. I think you mentioned arrival at Arcola, but is that, I didn't see that as from an augmented perspective. I thought it was going to be the SRO.
I think augmented, they're talking about extra duty security?
Yes.
Am I correct? Which would not be us?
Right.
So arrival, if we work out an agreement where arrival is a part of the agreement, our officer will be there. If not, it'll have to be whomever else you may be looking at.
Correct, and looking at it as a district-wide perspective too, we do have need for additional security services at various events. For example, our sports events and the like. Looking to put this all underneath one umbrella would be our approach moving forward.
Okay, so I'm just trying to make sure that I'm completely clear. So the request would be for augmented services beyond those hours that are listed here for the preferred future design?
So as we continue discussions with Chief and come to an amicable agreement, the services that we still believe that we would need potential security, on the security aspect side of things, need coverage for, that's where the augmented services could potentially fill that gap.
Okay. Thank you.
If I might, which we have addressed in the past, but unfortunately for us, that's an overtime issue for us, which is more of a cost factor for you, but it also comes down to the ability to cover. Again, our officers over here need to be sworn as Methacton officers. I only have 2 of those, so it becomes a numbers game for us also.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
I appreciate the
No problem.
presentation from both groups. So one question, currently we have security staff on site for sporting events and the like. So this would do away with the need for that security staff? It would all fall under the same agreement?
Can I add a point of clarification to your statement? It wouldn't do away with the need, but we would look to encompass our security services underneath one group versus a security group for this, a security group for this, a security group for this. And I'm talking specifically for the augmented services, not specific to the school resource officer. So when we would approach this, we would approach it with a district-wide perspective and looking at what are those extra events and where we need additional security, or someone that need monitoring our perimeter or whatever outside of the SRO day, and that's where those augmented services would come in.
So we would try to leverage a bulk purchase.
Okay, so then I guess as a follow-up to this evening, because I'm pretty sure you wouldn't know this off the top of your heads, but I'm curious as to what we're currently spending on those security services, and to see how that would, that's not something that we considered as part of the SRO contract previously, and if we are looking at these things being bundled, I think we need to compare the before and after costs. So that's information I think would be useful going forward.
Yeah, that's certainly a fair question, and it's part of what we still need to do. While we know that, we theoretically would have a $200,000 budget per se to bring the SRO services in, we're trying to add more to the extended day for this, and then once we know what we need in terms of that, whether it be relationships solely with Lower Providence and maybe some extended hours, or it might be a combination of a relationship with Lower Providence and some other combination at the middle level, and then some other augmented services. It'll depend, because those other services are usually, in all fairness, a lot less expensive, but they don't bring the same, and I said this from the very beginning, we can get similar services, and similar doesn't mean same. And while the recommendation you have here this evening is about having that police car and having that relationship going forward to the extent that we're able to do that, and then to supplement that with some other reasonable resources that keep us safe, but at the same time, work within the parameters of the dollars that we have.
So then I guess my other question, so the grant that funded this program from the beginning obviously is no longer in existence. I don't know if you've looked into, are there other grants available, particularly in light of the current climate and what we're seeing on a national level? Are there other grants out there that we could pursue as a way of funding this? I don't know if it's been explored or not.
So helping us to guide this whole decision and provide input, we've been in contact with our Montgomery County school safety coordinator, it's a long title, Steve Beck, who's been instrumental in not only providing us with additional information, but also programs and grants like you're mentioning. Through this conversation, and part of this whole process will be to continue to engage with him to see what's available at the time of what we know exactly what we're looking for, to then see if there's grants out there available to us to provide some offset of funding to help us get what we need.
And the follow-up, PCCD grants are still available, but they normally go to new programming or programming for at-risk areas to supplement or add to that. In '06, when we started with the program, we tried reapplying several times after that, and we didn't meet the level because the program was already in place and functioning properly, and that's kind of what we run into now. The reason we got it originally was we were starting it in a middle school, which was kind of like a new endeavor, and they bought into that. But once they ran it through for the 3 years, it was kind of like, okay, you guys are going forward. You're doing great. Keep on going.
That's it.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board?
Okay. Okay, just a couple things. I think it would be really helpful from an administrative side to kind of take the major items that are in the as-is, the current contract, and develop a little matrix so that we can see, where you expect the to be based on your revised model of, an SRO, a part-time SRO, and the augmented services, so we can see the major tasks. I don't expect that you'd get everything, but it would be good to kind of see them in a comparative view side by side, so we can really say, okay, we can see where we are trading things off. I just think that would be helpful as you kind of work through this process. Obviously, you don't have a budget for the various factors yet because you've got to work through that. In the augmented services, I think there was discussion back late in the spring that if it was outsourced, whomever we brought in for outsource would also be sworn in basically as a Methacton police officer if they had that skill set, or we talked about that. Is that still the plan with the augmented services?
So with the augmented services in that specific conversation, at that point in juncture in time, we were not clear as to what where we were going with this entire program.
Mm-hmm.
So, like Dr. Serby alluded to earlier, we can get Act 120 certified people here to provide a similar service, but not the same in terms of what he was saying. So yeah, we could reach out to private security firms to provide those individuals, but our standpoint is that Lower Providence Township Police provide us a greater added value with them acting in the role of SRO and also developing this further.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I'm saying continue to develop the model, but for whatever's defined as the augmented services.
If we felt it's so desired that those extra security or those augmented services, that was a requirement that we felt was important, yes, we could build that into the proposal in which they would respond to.
All right, so, when you come back to us, I think it'd be beneficial to know if there are any of those that would require that.
So that would be us telling them that's what we require, and they then fulfill that need.
Yeah, but we'd like to know too, I think as a part of your recommendation, right?
Sure.
As we're doing this comparative thing, we know we trade off and that's that's something we got to kind of do the cost benefit on, right?
If I may, I'm going to go back to Dr. Zerby's same and similar analogy. You may be able to get an armed security officer, but they are not going to bring the same benefit. As it stands now, yes, you're paying for a full-time SRO in the high school in Arcola. What you aren't paying, but what you do realize is our supervision, our command staff, our detective unit, whatever resource the high school requires or Arcola requires. Arcola, we're going to do it anyway, that's my jurisdiction. But the high school, we inevitably send assistance to that officer if they need it. If it's an investigation, an interview, a connection, we provide that. I don't know any security agencies that can do that for you.
Yeah, I probably agree. I'm just trying to make sure we understand whatever proposal we get, we understand how and where it'll be staffed and to what level to the greatest extent we need it to be certified as overall.
Yes, Mr. Doran, those are fair questions, and those are the things that we'll need to work through as we begin the negotiation process. So, for example, if we're able to negotiate certain levels of service with Lower Providence that are commensurate with what we believe our need is, that will look a lot different than if we're not able to negotiate that, and therefore we would have we'd have certain resources freed up to purchase different services from a security firm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the ultimate question, and quite frankly, it really gets back to the budget. And while this evening we've said a lot, and while this evening my administration has worked very hard at trying to put together what we believe is the right program based on our available resources, I think the ultimate decision for us as a board is really after hearing some of our comments here this evening, do we want the recommendation, and are we comfortable with the recommendation that we have based on the dollars available? Or would we be better suited with the same program that we have today, which would cost us about, I'm going to estimate it about $99,000 more? And ultimately, that's where we kind of get to the heart of the matter. And that's just something that, as we move. So next week, what we're going to ask you to do is to vote to give us direction. That direction specifically on the recommendation that Mr. Sosnovic and the two building principals shared with you this evening, with the consideration that was shared here from Lower Providence. But in the same instance, as we start going down the path and doing that work, creating an RFI, going out and looking for all those resources, having the conversations with Lower Providence, while that's all good and intended, is this, the direction we want to go in? And that's what we need from you next Tuesday. So there may be a lot more discussion next Tuesday, but I think once you give us that direction, we're going to be going full steam ahead to try to leverage those agreements and to bring them before you for, of course, your approval in terms of those contracts, so that we can have this program of services available for our students and our community. Otherwise, if we were able, if we said, we have find another $99,000, we would just keep the program, intact as it is today with maybe some minor adjustments. So I thought I'd share that because, it all started with a different conversation, and the conversation was about, municipalities and the district contributing to this particular, resource, and that's, it's evolved over time through the budgeting process and to us today.
Well, it started as that, and it was a cost issue.
I understand.
So you guys the administration came back with a proposed budget with this number in it. So, if there's a trade-off, I think the administration has to advise the board what they're trading off and where they're going to find the additional $100,000.
Well,
the budget's $200,000.
Well, we're proposing a program within the limits that we have.
But you're asking us.
No, I'm asking for on Tuesday to approve the direction from what we presented here this evening, and that is the presentation that Mr. Sosnovic and our two building principals put together. That's what we're prepared to go in that direction, and we believe that will be appropriate. But I know that there's a lot of other discussion happening here this evening that may rise to the level of having same and similar. And as such, I just want to be clear that, we're hoping that the high school could be the same as it's been, or somewhere close to that. We think that we'll be able to provide some reasonably good services in some form or another, whether it's private and or Lower Providence or a combination of the two. And we also believe that we'll be able to, add some additional value with security services on those augmented hours. So otherwise, we won't be presenting this to you this evening.
Could we just double check on those costs? The budgeted that you're doing, the budgeted amount that you're shooting for with this proposal is $200,000. And what's the current program cost?
Well, the budget for this year is $200,000.
Right. What was the program before?
$299,000.
And we don't know what a new one would be because the contract ends regardless.
We have some estimates, but that's why Mr. Sosnovic will do an RFI. That's why we'll have conversations with Lower Providence so we think we're within the range of $200,000. We need to get the definite, and that means we need to have those negotiations and bring forward a contract for the board to review.
Right.
So that we can get those details.
And I understand that, but what I'm also asking is to find out what the cost will be if we kept the exact same program that we've had in the years past to keep going. Is it $299?
Yes.
Roughly $300,000.
Okay.
Right.
Even though our agreement currently ends, you're just going to roll it over?
That's for the salaries of the officers in question. That's based on that. There's obviously, it's a little more exact. And the other issue is, I've never negotiated this contract, nor has Dr. Zerbe. We haven't sat down and looked at, this is our contract as it stands.
Right.
In that framework, what can we come up with? I've been pressed with, at the direction that I received from Dr. Zerbe, is my budget's $200,000. What can you offer me for that? Well, what I offer for that is a reduced service.
Well, that's obvious.
Right.
I mean, you're spending one-third less than what you were spending in previous years. So what I'm asking is what it would cost to keep that current program running. So in other words, you need to look at that contract and see what it would be. Okay, well, to keep everything status quo, the 2 full-time SROs, this is what it's going to be for the next contract cycle, whatever, 3 or 4 years, whatever that's going to be. And then let's look at this new program.
It's $299.
So, okay.
Well, I mean, part of what's been presented to us is that the administration's reviewed what the current program did well and where are the gaps. And they've come back to us with a recommendation of how to change up the program to meet the needs of the schools that were covered, and then some additional coverage of the new program. So I think they've presented to us what they feel is the best form of a program, where it's covering all the buildings to a certain extent.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate because we don't know how it's going to cover. We don't know the hours they're going to be spent in every building. We don't know what that's going to be. Okay, I'm just saying, I'm trying to compare apples with apples here and trying to say, and I know we have to go, and the board has to authorize the district to go ahead and look into this. So, anyway.
Okay. If I could finish my point, Herb. So part of this is there's going to be reduced fees proposed to the Lower Providence, and there's going to be incremental fees to other security coverage for other events, in addition to pulling in those already existing other fees. So to Kim's point earlier, if we can get a breakdown of what the current fees have been, so we have the $300,000 plus all those other areas of coverage, how does that compare to that? Just looking at the program, if we tried covering this with the Lower Providence SRO officers under the new paradigm of having coverage at different points throughout the day and in the evenings and all that, it could potentially require, more people to do that, or a significant amount of overtime with the 2 existing. So, the blended approach of trying to maintain the full-time presence at the high school plus some form of Lower Providence presence in the other school plus the blended, I think that's a good striking point if we can keep everything within our budget parameters. But we haven't even really talked about the full budget parameters yet, because we just talked about the SRO program and the Lower Providence, but now we have these other security services that have been going on and potentially changing up things here. So, if we can understand what the current program did from a coverage perspective, which Scott was alluding to, plus here's what you're dropping from that in terms of coverage, whether it just be, these hours during these days in Arcola because we want them at different hours, plus what's being added in. And then we also get the budget breakdown of here what those hours are versus the others. That's going to be helpful, and hopefully out of your RFI process where you engage those other companies to get that pricing, and you can put that into there, and we get that full picture put in front of us, then I think we'll all feel more comfortable.
Yep, that's exactly what we plan to do. But we need the authorization to kind of move forward on those pieces. Grab those details next Tuesday. Yep.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from the board?
I just had one other question, and then I'll pass it down the lane here. The other services that we're talking about, the other stuff that happens, where does that reside in the budgets now? Is that under athletics? Is that under some special event? Where does that sit in the budget if we were to look for it?
I'd I don't know that particularly.
Okay.
But
I just
so-
don't
can
remember a
certainly-
line
Yeah, I can
that
certainly
covered
find that
stuff
out.
like
yeah.
that.
Any other questions?
I'd just like to get a sense of how much the decisions about the new program are based on the money decisions, and how comfortable you are and your staff as far as what this new program would be compared to what we have now. I mean, I know the specifics we're going to get, but I also would like to know how the building administrators might feel about this compared to the program we currently have.
My anticipation is that there's not really a change under this for me at the high school level. That's, so I unfortunately would have to defer to Amy in terms of where the major change would be. The only thing I would lose my SRO for would be that they would be going to Worcester on occasion, which would put them out of the building a little bit, but that would be it.
It's clearly a change. You can see it in what we, if you're comparing what do we currently have as a model and what we need, what we're proposing to go to. That being said, I think there are some definite pros and cons to both. And, forgive me, having only been there a few months, I'd have to really look deeper into that, into the history of that. I wasn't here for the last several years. But I think it's something that whatever we need to do, we're going to do. I can say that confidently as a staff and for me as an administrator, and we will continue to work closely and have that partnership, and I know that staff will rally around whatever we need to do. So we can make anything work. It's definitely a change, and then we have to shift our thinking accordingly. I think there's some benefits to it on the other ends in terms of what we don't have in terms of after-school coverage or evenings. So those are things that could be a positive. But to answer your question, we'll do whatever we need to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the...
We get to ask more questions, then we're going to have to put filter. I mean, I have a question for the chief that I think...
There's courtesy of the floor at the end of the meeting. They can make statements. It's not a question and answer.
Yeah, it's not a Q&A session for the public. You can provide statements at the courtesy of the floor at the end for us to consider.
But Chief Turtle's leaving.
I wasn't planning on staying. If you would like to either provide the statement to them and I'll respond to it, or email me directly, I'd be more than happy to respond to
I just
it.
wanted to ask you...
I'm going to abide by their rules, so whatever they suggest to me to do.
Okay.
I mean, we're looking at 2 contracts for police officers here. I want to know how they jive. And he, unless I have to go down to the police station and ask you, not to be rude, but this is a work session and the public should be able to ask questions. If this is...
Well, we don't
You can ask
know.
questions. You can
Yeah.
ask questions of the board or me, and we can then
Does
if.
the board answer questions about the police union contract in Bruce Township?
Again, we're not here in terms of a discussion about a union agreement with Lower Providence Township. There are particulars that they, as a township, and you're welcome to go to one of their meetings and have that discussion with them or contact them privately. We're trying to work through getting a service from Lower Providence Township. It just so happens that their service includes a union agreement. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I just want to make sure that, but you, at the end of the meeting, if you have a question and it's something that we're not able to answer, I'll take the question and we'll try to get you a response.
The board wants to draw up a contract that may conflict with the township's contract.
We already have contracts with them, and so we know how to draw those contracts up. We already have contracts with Lower Providence for the SRO services, which are union. So
Well, my only question was, these police officers, are they specifically under the school district's contract? Are they under the township's contract? Are they under both contracts?
they are under,
Taxpayers in Lower Providence.
they're under one contract, and that's the contract with Lower Providence Township we purchase services from, and we've been doing that for more than 10 years. You're welcome to ask her the additional questions at the end of the evening. The next item on the agenda is facilities assessment. Mr. Fretz and Peter from AEM is here to present. I asked the board if they'd be so kind to take the seats in the front row. There's some information that will be presented on the screen. Thank you.
be fine, just like that.
Just like that. That's what I'm looking for. Good evening, everyone. I'm here tonight to talk a little bit regarding the facilities assessment study and the timeline that it took to get to where we are tonight. I'm looking where I'm going, Pete. The purpose of the facilities assessment study and workbook was to provide the board of directors of the school district with the factual data analysis and recommendations required to make the capital improvement decisions for each school facility. This is the timeline that you're looking at from September of 15, kind of like the body of the work that was accomplished administratively and with your help on getting us to where we are today. As you look through there, you see the action items in the various months where things had happened, various meetings took place, reviews, multiple reviews, to work through the facilities assessment draft workbook and the book, and also get to the point of a facilities assessment workbook. Tonight, we'll also be looking for recommending the acceptance of the draft facilities assessment study and the facilities assessment workbook for administration and board decision making. Pete's going to be reviewing the actual workbook that we have in place that we will be using as a tool to help us through the projects that we would have.
Okay. I'm going to start off here. Each building has its own tab. And so we'll start at Arrowhead first. Every item from the facility assessment study has been given a number, its own number. And then it's put in here so that we can sort it. So the first item at Arrowhead is investigate the source of water infiltration and repair rusted steel. Then each item is assigned a category. And the categories include life cycle maintenance, code and life safety, infrastructure, capital improvement, enhancements. And it's not going to let me see that bottom one, which is operating procedures. Basically, life cycle maintenance are items that are necessary due to normal and excessive wear and tear. These aren't typical items that are on like a maintenance program or something that needs to be taken care of annually. This is something that wears out at the end of its life and needs to be replaced. Code items are just as what they say, fire, accessibility, occupational codes, and such. Infrastructure is what we'd like to classify as a system. So infrastructure would be like HVAC, structural, electrical, or the building envelope, the roof. Capital improvements are an item that significantly adds or modifies a facility, such as a new building, a building addition, an extensive renovation, a refurbishment project. An enhancement is something that we consider, if the funding is available, it's something that'd be good to do, but it's not absolutely critical to operations. And operational procedure is something that is more of an in-house, not to use the same word again, but a procedural item, something that just needs to be corrected and done properly. So for this first item in Arrowhead, it's identified as an infrastructure issue. The second way that we classify them is by specification division. And a spec division is an industry standard format for organizing components of construction. Every item falls into one of the divisions. So Division 1 is general requirements. Division 3 is concrete. Division 5 is metals. Why this is important is that we may want to group items based on the type of work they are across all buildings, say like roof work. Maybe it would make sense to take care of all the roofs at all the buildings at one time, and we can save money that way.
Next, and maybe the most important feature of the workbook, is the priority. All items are given a priority assessment based on the importance. And priority 1 is something that needs immediate attention in the current school year. Item 2 is broken into 2 parts, 2.1, 2.2. These are important items that should be addressed in the following year or the next year after that. Item 3 can be pushed off a little bit, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. And item 4, these are less important items that we'd look at outside of the current 5-year window. Also have the opportunity to mark things when they're completed. They're marked as a done. So at this point, let's say this item got completed. We would change it to done. We would put in the price, and that would be a completed item. The last sorting feature is the page reference in the book that you all received, and that just helps you to say, well, I'd like to read a little more about this, so you can turn to page 5 and read a full description of what's going on with this item. The items can be sorted, so you say, well, let's see all the priority 1 items, and you can see Mark's already working on a bunch of them. The summary page identifies the total items for each building. It counts the number of items that are done and tells you what's left, calculates the work that's been completed, and what you have left to complete. There's also an ability to adjust inflation, and that's spread out across each building then, equally. What we see this being used for in the future is this would be your current budget model, and then next year we would change the dates and maybe adjust your priorities. So while the design team went through and we gave our best guess at what we think the priorities are, this is a budgeting tool, and I think it's important to realize that administration will have a big hand in deciding where they can appropriate the money for each of these items. Does anybody have any questions on this? Dr. Zerbe, Scott, is there anything I should show in addition?
No, the only thing I'm thinking is, in conjunction, obviously, with the workbook, there is the official study, and it's got an introduction section that kind of lays out the process and the procedure how the workbook was put together and put together, and how they also will relate to each other. I think that's important. And then I think the other piece is as we work through tonight's session and the next week's session, we're not necessarily approving how the items are categorized now from year 1 to year 2. What we're doing is accepting the workbook, accepting the study that was done, and then Dr. Zerbe and Mark and the administration really need to kind of go through this and make sure the prioritizations are in line with what they need from school, and then us as a board will be able to say, okay, well, these other 10 items were a 1, why aren't we addressing them? So it will enable us to have a healthy dialogue around capital planning.
There's one other point that I wanted to make. There's a concept of what we're terming interdependent work. Certain items on here, let's just say, take the roof, for example. If you have HVAC units on the roof, and you have an HVAC unit replacement as an item in here at that building, maybe you have that, as an item 3. So it can be out here somewhere. But the roof is a priority 1. Well, you wouldn't replace your roof and then come back in 2 years later and have them tear it up and put the units on there and potentially damage the roof in place. So that would be kind of an interdependent project. Like you'd say, let's do the roof and the HVAC unit replacement at the same time so that we don't risk any destruction later on. That's identified out here in the comment section. coordinate lighting replacement and systems work above the ceilings. If you're going to replace the lights, that's a good time to replace the ceilings as well because they're taking them down.
One of the other things that you had pointed out in the property committee was the ability to create a customized worksheet. So you could take all of the roofing related items, for example, from each school and pull them all together into one list. If we wanted to say,
Yes.
put out an RFP for that.
Yes, I did a sorted, this was an example that I made was the roof. I copied all the roof items from each building so you can see Arrowhead, Audubon, and then could prioritize them and see which buildings need to go first. Or you could say, well, you know, we've got about $12.5 million worth of roof work coming up, although you can see $3 million of it is beyond 5 years. And yeah, administration can make more tabs, copy this one over, overwrite this. This is truly their tool.
So this evening, we placed a static copy of this entire workbook at your desktop. So that's for you to take home as board members. Certainly, if I could ask the board to return back the receipts, we'll have Peter and Mark answer any additional questions. Ultimately, as part of the facilities assessment and the action that we're asking you to take next week is, as I believe Mr. Dorn alluded to, is to accept the body of work included in the manual you received in April of 2016, along with the workbook that's presented here this evening and was recently presented to the Property and Finance Committees. The revised items that have been added since April of 2016 are included in the workbook. The introduction of the original book that you received has been revised and it will be provided to you electronically and will be replaced in the books for the administration. And we're asking for you next Tuesday to accept that work so that we as an administration can move forward making a recommendation on some capital improvement needs to the property committee, hopefully, here in November. That's the current timeline as we start talking about preparing budgetarily, as well as taking the long view of where we need to go with this with these potential projects. In addition to that, I will tell you, those of you that were in the property committee meetings as well as the finance committee meetings know that we talked about a process associated with what we considered small projects and large projects. I think there were some recommendations to those timelines. I'm in the process of completing those recommendations and sharing them with the board. But essentially, it talks about a calendar year and how we would get from a recommendation to funding to approval and then to construction. And simply put, we think that there's enough guidance in those two scenarios that I presented that allow us to stay on task together to get some of this work done. Any questions for myself, Mr. Fretz, or Peter? I don't know your last name, I'm sorry.
My last name is Meckley.
Meckley.
The one comment I would have is really for Mr. Fretz and going forward and managing this and being able to present to the property committee that would then feed into future budgets. The consulting company put numbers in here that they thought were reasonable. So, if they have a line item in here that says $100,000, we need to start tracking what our actuals are against each of those so that we can understand how they come in. And that's more important in the years out because we're talking about a multi-year plan here. So when we're talking about expenses either for the property or that feeding into the budget, what we can learn from reviewing the actuals versus theirs is, do they tend to be, 10% too low, 10% too high, and then learnings we can feed into when we talk about next year's budget and the year after that. So when you're managing the spreadsheet and you're doing, clicking the done and the actual cost, if you can, take ownership of that and feed that information back to the property committee so that they understand what the actual spend is versus what this is, I think that should be your ownership to support the committee that way.
Part of what we discussed at the committee was that as you go out to bid for these certain things, because there's different requirements across the bidding, that exactly that would happen once the projects were closed off, that Mark would sit with the business manager, who would be the gatekeeper of the final costs that get put into the master program, so we know it's the certified and closed out cost of the particular task. The one other item that wasn't covered by Peter in detail here was we have the ability to add lines to this, so if we decide to break roofs up over a 3-year period, we can kind of go 4A, 4B, 4C under that category and then track the spend from that year and/or leverage that as a total buy, but then spread it over a period of time and track the cost. So they have a lot of flexibility within the tool. I think the onus is going to be on Mark and Dave and the business manager to make sure they develop the right processes and gatekeeping of the numbers.
Other questions?
I just had a couple quick questions. Forgive me if this was already mentioned, but I believe it was talked about in the Finance Committee, but I don't believe it was mentioned tonight, is that these numbers do not include the soft costs. That was across the board, it had been mentioned before that these numbers were inclusive. That is not the case.
And so let me just speak to that. So in the introduction, it does talk about the soft costs, and it explains that, and it says that the district should consider soft costs of anywhere between 15 and 20%, meaning that if it does require financing, it might be in terms of 20% soft costs versus a project that wouldn't necessarily require bonding.
And I just had two other things. One was a clarification that it does look like, according to these worksheets, that some of these items have been completed, but there's no dollar amounts being lumped in for, the cost to complete.
That's correct. To date, we haven't really added in the costs of things that we have completed yet. We certainly wanted to review the product with everyone here, and as we keep working on this, we will be updating.
Okay. And the third thing was, and this is just, in my mind, the one thing which is a little bit lacking here is the idea of, the creating the worksheet, where you're basically having to sort by school to get to, say you want to do a roofing. So you have to go to Audubon, sort by roof, copy and paste, put it in a worksheet, go to the next school and do the same thing. Sorry. I had hoped that there would be one sheet that was just a master list of all projects, across all schools. So if you wanted to use the sorting feature, you could just hit roof, and it would grab all of the roofing projects without having to manually cut and paste. So it's just, I don't know, that's something, it seems like a fairly easy add to this. I don't want it to hold up anything, but that was one thing which I did notice that, seemed to kind of be missing and could allow for error. If you're going from tab to tab to tab and copying and pasting, it seems like that would be an easy way to miss something. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then again, for the October 25th meeting, there will be reports from the various committees. If we flip over our agendas, there will be public comment on board action items, as well as approval of board minutes. Under number 9, fiscal items, Before you is a list of bills, treasury reports, budgetary transfers, facilities assessment study, the SRO program, and again, this is really to pursue the solicitation of those agreements to get the details that you've been speaking about here this evening. The next is a reimbursement resolution, and then last is a repository tax sale. I imagine there's going to be some questions on the last two items for sure. They came to my attention late in the process, and I wasn't able to put them on for discussion by the Finance Committee. So if you will, I'll just quickly talk about the repository tax sale. We received a letter that's attached to the agenda to approve the sale outlined by Montgomery County Tax Bureau, Claim Bureau, letter dated September 26, for a property located at 20 Moyer Road, Collegeville in Lower Providence. If you're not certain what a repository tax sale is, essentially a tax claim bureau under the Pennsylvania tax law does sales of property for failure to pay taxes. It starts off with a process called an upset sale, and it leaves all encumbrances for that property in place except for specific taxes. If the property cannot be sold under the upset sale, then the property is exposed to the next level, which is a judicial sale. The judicial sale is a sale where all encumbrances are wiped out, and the payment of the taxes gives the property free of all other encumbrances on record. If the property fails to be sold under a judicial sale, then it goes to a repository list. And so this list is then available for members of the public to bid on those particular items. So the attached a letter claims that a bid of, I believe it was $500, was accepted by other entities, and it has to be accepted by this board, being the last of those to accept, if they so choose to, the sale of this particular property. Are there any questions related to the repository tax sale?
Just one. In regards to the assessment of this, I kind of briefly mentioned this before, how does this affect us, now? Obviously the value would be $500. I don't know what the assessed value is currently. Is this a current reduction in assessment? And then do we have the opportunity in the future to have this property reassessed, or with this type of sale, or are our hands tied? Just if you could follow up on that for...
Right, so the first question, I do not know what the current value is. I wasn't able to gather that information, but I can tell you that once it's approved, its value will be based on this sale, as it so indicates in the letter that's posted to the agenda. It does not preclude us from future, if there's future improvements on the property that would lend itself to increased taxes, we would be able to acquire that in the future. But the differential between what we're collecting now and I guess really the statement is we're delinquent taxes, we're not getting paid anyhow. So, but I can research that value. Are there any other questions related to a repository tax sale?
Just it's $500, right?
That's accurate.
You want to know how much it's worth?
Go ahead.
Zillow has an estimate of $550,000. It's an 8-bedroom house, 2 baths, 4,000 square foot property. 20 Moyer Road, Collegeville, PA. Haven't been on that?
You missed the opportunity. That's part of the problem. Anyone else? Okay.
Related to the reassessment, how do we keep track of properties like this? Do we have any mechanism to
Typically, any reassessment of a property is indicated by a document that we receive monthly from the Tax Claim Bureau.
Yeah.
It shows adjustments made to taxes on properties in both Lower Providence and Worcester Township.
But we can't, or can we reinitiate an assessment? So for a year from now, can we proactively say, let's get that property reassessed? Or does that have to be from the county's direction?
Essentially, we have, if I don't believe this is a commercial property, so as a non-commercial property, we have not been doing what are called reverse tax appeals on non-commercial properties. We have done them and authorized them for commercial properties, but not for non-commercial. But that doesn't preclude you from doing it. But I think there are some other. I would ask our solicitor to weigh in at our next meeting on those particular matters, because there may be some mechanism that would prevent us from doing that. If there's no further questions, reimbursement resolution, this is a typical resolution that we do annually. It is the resolution for technology reimbursement. So as you've seen attached, we go out and we get what theoretically a loan for $1 million to pay for the technology equipment that we purchase on an annual basis, and then we use that as part of in our budget to pay that loan off over a period of time. And typically we've been able to get those loans at a 0% interest rate. And we're asking the board for approval to go out after that same loan again. Thank you.
Could I ask a question about that? The actual items that we purchase that get reimbursed by this loan, do they get authorized, or are they part of a line item that we've included in the budget?
Yes, so they are in the technology budget, and they are. So I think there were two questions here. Are they authorized purchases? And their purchases, yes. So for example, we authorize the implementation of the one-to-one Chromebook program. Essentially, that was the authorization is to say, go ahead and purchase those equipment. Again, when we purchase equipment from on a monthly basis, you get a list of bills. Those equipment are listed in those bills, and the authorization to pay those bills as part of the authorization as well. If there's no other questions on any other questions on the financial items under 9? If not, we'll go on to number 10, personal items. I'll just skip to the first one, employment administrative. Our president mentioned that there was an executive session held by the Finance Committee to approve employment for a Director of Business Services. I just want to explain the process. The administration held multiple interviews, but then moved the most recent interview candidates to a committee of the board. The board did conduct an interview, and based on my recommendation and the recommendation of the committee, I'm pleased to say that we're in the final stages of being able to put a name and the details associated with this placeholder item for the board's consideration at next week's meeting. Are there any questions related to that item at this time? If not, I'll turn the rest of it over to Mr. Harney.
Yes, we have 2 employment classifieds for your approval this month. We have 1 compensated professional development leave for your approval, 2 uncompensated leave professionals. There may be an additional one coming up next week when we add it to the agenda. We have 9 items under supplemental contracts for your approval this month. We have 3 additions to the classified substitute list. Again, there may be some additions to that next week as we concluded some interviews, depending on the clearances and reference checks to be finalized this week. We have 3 employments under community education for your approval and 1 advisement.
Any questions for Dr. Harney? If
Did I
not,
miss?
oh, there's a question.
List of volunteers I missed. Yes, that'll be on the agenda.
Just one question I had for you. For the supplemental contracts for the winter coaches, it looked like, and I didn't get a chance to look at it today to see if it was updated at all, but it looked like there was a decent number of vacancies there. Is that normal this late into the year that we haven't been able to find someone with these coaching positions?
It varies every season, but there's almost always some sort of vacancies at this point of the season with some of these positions, yes. They're being worked on as we speak with our Mr. Spiewak, our athletic director, but there are vacancies. I know of at least one, possibly two of these that will be filled by next week.
Any other questions? If not, moving on to number 12, policy. There are 13 policies that are on the agenda for first reading. I'm sorry. Katona, curriculum.
Thank you. On the agenda this evening, you have curriculum for your approval. This curriculum was presented at the Education Committee earlier this month, and you all also received copies of it along with a brief explanation of some of the key look-fors in the curriculum. There is the ELA for grades 7 and 8, both academic and honors. World language, French, German, and Spanish, inclusive of all levels except for Spanish 5 and Honor Spanish 5 and the AP courses, and the K-12 ESL curriculum, which was newly written based on new state updates standards.
Are there any questions for Dr. Katona? If there are no questions, we'll move on to number 12 now. There are 13 policies on for first reading, and under 12B, there are 7 policies for your approval at next week's meeting. Any questions related to policies?
I just have the one. At the last session, when we did the first reading for class rank, we had a little bit of a discussion around that, so I want to make sure we...
And I have the answer for you, and I didn't send that to you yet.
Okay.
So, yep, that, let me make sure that I have that. I can respond to that on Tuesday, but also send you an email with it as well as the rest of the board. But I think it's important that the public hears that response as well. I have it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on policy? If not, we'll go on to other gifts and donations. Trips, approve a trip for Methacton High School girls basketball team as listed. There are dates for members' calendars. I just want to add 2 dates, and just bear with me as I read these off. I want to add that October 27th, we want to schedule a town hall meeting for the purpose of soliciting input from stakeholders as to the decision-making process associated with the consideration of potential school closures. So with that, and then the next one that I'm going to mention, we're likely to put the advertisements out tomorrow. The next item would be for November 1st to hold a meeting whereby Malone and McBroom will present findings on the enrollment and capacity. It is our intent to release those presentations in advance of the meeting so as to provide reasonable opportunity for constituents to review and to be able to ask questions at the November 1st meeting. So again, the 2 additional dates that are important for your consideration is October 27th and November 1st. Both of those meetings will be held at Arcola Intermediate School, and the times are likely to be 7 o'clock. I just need to check with I need to check with Donna to make sure that that's what we scheduled, but I believe it'll be 7 o'clock, and the advertisements for both of these meetings will be properly posted in the newspaper as well as on the website. Are there any questions related to any other dates under 14 that are listed, or any of the 2 that I just mentioned? Yes.
Just for an understanding, you said the input from the town hall meeting is for the community Chris, you had mentioned at one point, developing the methodology of thought process of making the decision. Is that also part of the town hall meeting?
What I thought we'd do with the town hall meeting is start the meeting by highlighting some of the key decision input points and start to outline some of the underlying assumptions that we want to feed into the process. So it's not just about the M&M, it's, that coupled with budgetary considerations, coupled with a lot of different things. So it's the board working together to define the process, but also infusing anybody from the public, their thoughts and opinions on how we go through the entire process. And the goal was to have that before we see the first complete study presentation, which would be the M&M. Okay.
So it's two parts. One is sort of a working session on how to making a decision, and the second part is just to solicit input towards how to make a decision.
The decision process.
Yeah, okay. All right,
yeah.
Thank you.
We didn't want to do it in a vacuum, and we didn't want to do it, the board by ourselves. We wanted to have the public be able to respond to that.
So I just would recommend that when we announce this town hall or put it on the homepage, that people understand that it's sort of two parts.
I'm actually reviewing the communication before it goes out tomorrow morning to make sure we have as much detail as we can into it to make it as clear as possible.
Any other questions on dates? No? And then there's, under old business, the high school scheduling study. I just want to make note that there will be a draft provided to the board and to the high school here by the end of the month. That information will be used by the high school to perpetuate the discussion on how best to leverage the information to ensure that we are operating in the best interest of our students, given all the information that was collected through the process, the available or the recommended options associated with the issues that were brought to the attention of the DMC by the administration and by the central administration, as well as by staff within the building. It is our intent to be able to move forward with that discussion to ultimately come to a recommendation for the future scheduling needs of the Methacton High School no later than November of 2017. So that is our recommendation with that information at this time. Next, under new business, superintendent goals. I want to share with you in just some brief synopsis. I presented in an email to the Board of School Directors draft of the superintendent's goals as something that, as a board of 10, we need to come to a conclusion on, but generally speaking, as a framework for the start of our discussion, essentially be able to have focus on the strategic plan as it was presented back in April of 2016, to also have focus on the high school scheduling analysis and to come to a resolution by February. Also to work with the vendors, particularly Mylone and McBroom, to make sure that we bring all information and matters appropriate to the board to help them render a decision as they see fit in the school consolidation matter. And lastly, to review the current fiscal operations and to establish standards and clear and consistent communications regarding all fiscal matters. So those are the general topics that I've shared with the board. I imagine that may need to have some discussion, but it's my hope that between now and next Tuesday, you'll have time to review that information, and then maybe at next Tuesday's meeting we can have further discussion about those goals and wrap that up so we can continue moving forward. Lastly, under new business, varsity softball field remediation. It has been discussed at the property committee meetings, as well as going to be shared here this evening, that we had some outstanding work to be completed on the fields at Methacton High School. One particular matter is the varsity softball field. It was recommended by our clerk of the works, Fidavia, that we ask for that, while we have numerous items and issues to resolve with the general contractor, it was suggested that in order to get that field playable for March of 2017, that we break that piece off and begin aggressively moving towards the remediation of that field. We sent several letters and communications over a period of several weeks and months to what's called Applied Landscaping Technologies, and they as of Monday, as of this past Monday, have agreed to complete the work as outlined based on the information sent to them last week. So while we had much discussion at the property committee meeting on the 10th of October, and while it was decided at that property committee meeting that we go with an alternative vendor, it was recommended, as the attorneys, both the school district solicitor and the attorney for ALT, were continuing in communication, that by our attorney recommending that we continue that discussion, giving Applied Landscape Technology every opportunity to participate as needed, it would be in our best interest long-term. And therefore, I'm not recommending any new action or any additional action by the board this evening. This item was put here in the instance that we did not receive that approval on Monday from Applied Landscape Technologies, and therefore we would have had to recommend the previously discussed recommendation from the property committee meeting to you this evening. But with that said, there's no further recommendation from the administration or action needed by the board. Any questions on any of the matters under new business?
I do. On the varsity fields, Dave, I am very concerned that this supplier has had all summer to rectify the softball fields and failed to do so despite numerous things. And at the nth hour, he now says, I'm going to fix it. I just am extremely concerned that we gave him plenty of opportunity to remedy, and I'm not sure why council is gun-shy about pulling the plug on that particular piece of it, because our confidence in this supplier has got to be at about the zero level, that either number one, he'll get it done on time, or number two, get it done correctly, because he's going to be rushing towards a fix. So I think we need to understand how you're going to put him on a time clock for this remedy to make sure it gets done in the same time frame that we discussed with the alternative supplier, because I actually think that he's going to run you to ground and that field's not going to be ready based on his historic performance on this entire subject. So I just think that we're running a huge risk by leaving this in that contract, and we certainly were within our legal rights to yank this. And he really didn't meet the timelines that we painted before the property committee. So we seem to continually bend over backwards for this guy, albeit for no apparent reason, because we've got zero performance out of him relating to this.
Mr. Dorn, I certainly understand your concern. I'm sure there's others that share your similar concern. We've certainly had some issues with the general contractor. I can tell you that This general contractor is starting on Thursday, as he committed to, similar to that of which the alternate, if we would have had to approve one this evening, would have started. Their plan is to be here Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this week. And we've taken the necessary steps to provide them the detailed type of scope of work that's required. We are going to monitor them 24/7 to make sure that they're doing the work and as soon as they stop the process, then we have enough justification to move on. The issue reasonably boiled down to the actual scope of work and allowing the alternative vendor to determine the scope of work differently than what that Applied had originally thought was necessary to complete the work. We cleared that matter up. We included information that was provided to us by our original field architect, David Horn, from Architera. Included that in addition to the information shared to us through the alternate vendor, as well as from Fredavia's review of the work. It's a comprehensive request to have this work done. And in some of the previous dialogues, that comprehensive scope wasn't included in some of those matters. And that's why the solicitor felt that it was appropriate at this time to make sure that we tie this matter up and put a bow on it and put it one last opportunity for this vendor to come through. But your concern is shared with many, and I'll be the first to pull this plug if they don't begin performing on Thursday.
I would say if he hiccups, you better pull.
To the general lack of confidence in this vendor, who's the best person to, on a daily basis, go out there and assess, are they doing a good job or not? And can we have that person check them on a daily basis?
That's exactly what we're doing. We're going to use Fedavia, our construction management firm, to do that. They're going to be here with us 24/7.
And the cost for that ought to come out of Applied Landscape. That cost shouldn't be borne by us because they've caused the issue. So any additional supervision should come right off of their bill out of the retainage. Well, we're paying twice for the service. We paid for them to do it, to oversee the services when they did it the first time. Now we got to pay again to see if they can fix what they didn't do right, So that's a recoverable cost from a contracting perspective, I would think.
Any other comments or questions on any of the new business items?
I have another question regarding the varsity softball fields. As we had discussed during the property committee meeting, one of the questions that we had was when this alternate contractor could begin work. Did we get that information?
We did. They were able to start this Thursday, and therefore, as part of our discussion originally was, were they able to start sooner, and if so, should we pull a special meeting together to get a vote on the matter? And then when we found out that they weren't able to start till Thursday, it allowed us to bring this matter before the board with potentially having you consider the vote this evening.
So I guess my other concern is, worst case scenario, Applied Landscape drops the ball this week, and now we've decided, so now we're in a situation where we do need to go to this alternate vendor. Would we be able to vote on that on Tuesday? I mean,
Absolutely.
What is our backup plan? Because I'm in agreement with Scott on this, that this vendor has not proven themselves one iota in this process, and I'd have very serious reservations about their ability to get this done. And the fact that we have to monitor the situation 24/7, like Scott said, we have to bill them for that time, because that's not something that we should have to do. If we went with this other vendor, we'd be able to take much more of a hands-off approach, but because we're continuing with them we're now in a situation where not only are we skeptical of the ability of this vendor to do the work, but we're also in a position where we have to monitor it constantly, which is less than ideal.
I completely understand on the two items that you've suggested. Yes, we can, if things aren't working the way they need to be working, we can come next Tuesday on the 25th and ask for, present a recommendation, have a second vendor start moving as soon as possible. On the terms of charging the vendor back, I'm going to look into that. That's a very good suggestion, and I'll look, and I can't guarantee that we're going to be able to do that. I mean, common sense wise, it probably means that we probably can, but I'm not the contract expert, so let us look into that, but thank you.
Hey, Dave, just to follow up on Kim's comment, I know we don't usually vote at work sessions, but perhaps it would be beneficial to vote to give you that conditional approval so we don't have to wait till Tuesday to pull the trigger if they fail, like, starting Thursday.
I don't think we need to formally vote, but to give you guidance to put an agenda item on.
I think that's what he's saying. No, I'm saying vote to say that if they fail, we take a vote to say you may proceed at that cost that we discussed, I think it was $22,000, to the alternative vendor, so we don't have to lose another 5 days. Because theoretically, you'd lose Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. The earliest they could start is Wednesday. So does that make sense to at least give you that ammunition for the cost we discussed at the property committee? Instead of, because you're running out of weather days here.
Just as a point of context and clarification, we're dealing with an issue of getting grass to germinate before the weather turns. So that's why every day counts, and with the weather that we're fortunate to be having right now, I think it's even more critical.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
The problem is I don't have all the details associated with trying to make that motion.
Well, I guess I need to ask the board, is the board interested in doing that? If so, it'll just take me a minute to grab the details, the vendor name and the dollar amount not to exceed. I mean, that's really what we can do. I mean, we're going to spend that dollar amount regardless, because that's the dollar amount that we're going to end up paying the current vendor. So it's going to come out of that same bucket of money that we have in reserve. Do you have it there?
I have it. Herb seems to have it.
I'm inclined to go, while Dr. Zerbe looking at this, and I agree with what you put out there, Scott, because every day we do wait is a day lost of getting these fields ready. And I just don't have any faith in this guy in Applied Landscape Technologies. I mean, it just doesn't seem like they're going to, if they don't show up on Thursday, what are we going to do,
And while we're researching that, this is a bit concerning to me in the fact that we've now had the entire property committee question if this is the right way to go. How is this decision even being made to go with them in the first place? I mean, is this something that the administration wants to take on 100%, is this is the route we're going? I'm a little concerned in terms of a board, is this what we want to do? Do we even want to go with them, or do we want to go with the alternate vendor? I mean, normally we go with the recommendation of the property committee. So my other question would be, is the alternate vendor could start on the same day. Could they do it for the same amount of money?
That's accurate. Here's the issue. If we go with the alternate vendor without giving the contracted vendor the opportunity to do the work, I'll end up paying the alternate vendor, and then in a legal matter, be able to pay the current. So I'll be paying twice for the work. I'm at risk of doing that, and that's why we're in the position that we're in at this point in time.
Sorry, could you just explain a little bit more why you'd be...
So if we do not give Applied Landscape Technologies the opportunity to do this remediation, and we go with the alternate vendor, the alternate vendor would then need to be paid by us. And if the Applied Landscape Technologies wants to sue us for failure to allow them to do the work, we could end up having to pay them the same amount of money that we had paid the alternate vendor to perform the work. So we could be paying for the same work twice. One, to get the work done by the alternate vendor, and two, in legal results.
But haven't they already failed to comply with their contract, Dave? I mean, they've had notice to remedy a couple times, right? I mean, this is not we've been after them to remedy for months.
And could I just ask, what is the amount of money that we're talking about, so we have the magnitude? Okay.
I'm going to make the recommendation that that amount of money be not to exceed $22,000. Are we prepared to have that, to do that vote? Is that what we want to do? We advertise this meeting that we can take a vote if we so choose to. But before we do take a vote, I can put the motion on the floor. You would then need to get public comment, and then we would be able to take a vote then. Mr. President?
Paul? Yeah, my preference is not to vote. I mean, I understand the principles here, but I mean, if we're going to consider the vote, then we should have published this as a possibility to vote. I realize at the end of the day, we're doing the right thing, but I just don't like the precedent setting it from that perspective. Is there from? Yeah, I know, but
Many years without time.
yeah. I guess I was trying to read the on the bottom here, the first page here. It says, please note the board can take action during any regular meeting. A public comment obviously would need to be held whenever agenda items are scheduled for vote. So from our perspective of consistency, I understand. I don't know. I understand. Hopefully the guy shows up on Thursday, but.
I mean, again, the next time that this could be voted upon is Tuesday, the 25th, which is, I know it's only several days, but again, it's only several days, and it's, again, several days of the work not being done. So.
And Dave, is it still your recommendation after this discussion that your recommended route going forward would be to allow Applied the chance to do this over the next 3 days, not to exceed the 22,000? Is that your recommendation? That you would recommend to the board, right, to allow Applied to do the work over the next 3 days in an amount not to exceed $22,000.
I'm not making a recommendation at all at this juncture. The only recommendation I would make would be that which would be different than doing exactly what you said. I don't need board authorization to have that work complete by Applied Landscape Technology. If I wanted to have an alternative vendor, then I would need your approval, because you need to approve that engagement and that expenditure with the new vendor. So my recommendation this evening, while it's on the agenda and while the meeting is advertised appropriately, we were going to move forward with taking action if the recommendation from solicitor so deemed that necessary. At this point in time, I'm not asking for us to take an action. However, it was suggested here by Mr. Dorn that to give me that leeway, and that's where we stand. So
we did advertise correctly to enable us to take a vote. Is that what I just want to make sure I understand? Okay.
We specifically re-advertised this meeting for that reason.
So I
for this reason, because we knew that there's a likelihood that we would have to vote. But that was back before we got the notice on Monday.
So the opinion of the solicitor is that we continue with the contracted vendor. Do we have any other further context from the solicitor as to why his recommendation is that we continue with this vendor? I mean, does he feel that going with another vendor, despite the fact that this vendor has repeatedly failed to honor the contract, does he feel that we'd be putting ourselves at risk? Do we have any other information other than this is his recommendation?
Well, that's exactly it. We're at risk of having to pay for this remediation twice. It would be the remediation of the new vendor if we went with the new vendor, and we would have to pay potentially in legal costs associated with remedying the fact that it was originally in the held. See, we held $320,000 of the general contractor's work because of outstanding issues, and this $22,000 thereabout is part of that 320. So under the original agreement, we're obligated to pay them for the work that they perform. However, it hasn't been performed to, the liking of the district or the professionals or contract management, and therefore we're in a stage of litigation matters where we're trying to work the matter out so that we get the work done, at the same time avoid the actual straight litigation process. And this is typical near the end of a construction process. However, it's not typical for the type of cooperation we've received from this vendor, but in all fairness, I do trust our solicitor's opinion on this matter. It does make sense. We do know, you should know that by next Tuesday, if I tell you on Thursday or Friday of this week that we need to go with a new vendor, we need to be ready to take that vote on next Tuesday.
We've just been too lenient with the time, because he's had plenty of time to remedy. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the solicitor in this case. I think we should have taken a stand and said, listen, you've backed us into a corner, we're removing it, and you're going to suffer the consequences out of your retainage. I just, sometimes you got to send a message, because there's still other things we've got to rectify that retainage is tied to. And he's backed us into a corner, and he's the one that is going to control our destiny on this, and our athletes potentially could be the ones that suffer from it. So I just, I disagree with Frank in this case on that, but, we take the guidance on the solicitor. I still think that the board ought to consider, if we've advertised appropriately, to authorize Dave to, the second they don't meet, their schedule over this 3-day period, that we can pull the plug and go.
Can you explain to me how we publicly said that this was couldn't possibly come up for vote? Because I don't see it. I don't see it that way. I mean, it's new business, varsity softball. I understand there was a discussion, but I'm just talking about the public awareness that this could be voted upon today.
Well, the meeting was advertised in the newspaper.
It was advertised in the newspaper that we were going to address the field remediation. I don't have the exact verbiage.
Okay.
Well, I mean, at the bottom of this, it says the board can take action during any regular meeting.
This specific topic was advertised.
But this specific topic was advertised too.
We advertised specifically for this because
Okay, that's fine. If that was the case, then we're fine.
Can we either make a motion on this, or let's move on?
Yeah, let's just vote on it, give Dave the backup plan, or vote on the backup plan and move on.
So the motion would read, it would read that authorize the superintendent, in the instance that the general contractor fails to perform adequate work, that we're able to engage Tomlinson Baumberger to complete the remediation of the varsity softball field not to exceed $22,000.
Do you have a motion? Second? Any more comment from the board? Public comment?
Oh, okay.
Public comment? Yours was up first. So.
Joe Bickelman from Audubon. I was just wondering, the $22,000 to the alternate vendor, does that have to be formally bid, advertised, because it's over the $19,000 threshold? Just throwing that out there. The other aspect I have is maybe you can get a credit from Fidavia for not doing their job originally, too. They were supposed to be supervising the construction, and, they let this happen. I don't know the details of what happened, if there was not proper fill or whatever. I don't know what happened, but Fidavia is supposed to be watching that, so maybe we can get a credit from Fidavia, too. I think it needs to be bid.
We received 3 quotes. Is that accurate?
Yes.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. This matter was recognized and discussed at a property committee meeting in June, and I haven't heard much detail on 4 months that passed before it again came to the property committee in October. And I don't know what the date is for sure germination of grass seed. Is that November 15th or October 25th or whatever? And it's variable from year to year, but it's not variable that the softball team needs a place to perform their activities come next March or April. So, hopefully the administration has a backup plan, and because these fields were scheduled to be done about a year ago. In fact, it was a year ago in August. It begs the issue of can we monitor construction contracts, whether they're re-roofing or fields or whatever, with the present organization. So I'm concerned. And also, related to this contractor, the basin number 2, which is still at full level, although it hasn't rained for 2 weeks, shows that it's on impermeable rock, and surrounding it are a number of trees, and a number of those trees look like they were recently planted and dead. So, maybe there should be a discussion as to what are the obligations of having trees that are alive around on other parts of the field project. Thank you.
Any other comment? All right.
I'm going to make one addition to the motion and tag on the end of the motion that so long as it's compliant with the procurement laws. Okay? I need to check with the solicitor. Typically, 19.4 would require, anything over that would require me to get public bids, so I got to check on that. But you can choose to, vote on it with that particular caveat at the end of the motion. Does that make sense?
Any other public comment? All right. All those in favor?
Sorry, before the vote, are we voting with that caveat, just to make this clear?
Yeah.
I would recommend with that.
Yeah, let's vote with that caveat that he'll confirm.
Because that piece is additional. But I think that caveat makes sense.
Yeah, because I think that this is going to wind up coming back on us, that we're not going to be able to do this, but as long as that's in there to cover the basis, then I would agree. Okay.
All right, with that.
Before we vote then, could you just reread so that we're all completely clear on what we're voting on?
To authorize the administration, in the instance that the general contractor fails to perform the work adequately as prescribed under the scope of work for the remediation of the varsity softball field, and where the new vendor, where the superintendent is authorized to engage the new vendor, Thomas & Baumberger, at a rate not to exceed $22,000, so long as that engagement complies with the procurement laws of Pennsylvania.
All those in favor? Okay. Passes 7-0.
Okay, and then there's courtesy of the floor, then adjournment. So you want to offer courtesy of the floor?
Courtesy of the floor? Go ahead, John.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. With regard to the SRO presentation earlier in the meeting, it's my understanding that the current SRO program costs almost $25,000 a month. So where you have a $200,000 budget for this fiscal year, come January, $150,000 of that will be spent, and to meet budget, you have $50,000 to cover the rest of the school year. So I think that's a serious concern on the finances. And relative to finances, Lower Providence, which operates on a calendar year budget, and they're now working their budget for next year, I guess they'd be faced with having a tax increase to cover 2 additional policemen beyond what they presently need. So, that explains why Mr. McFarland came here this evening. Also, relative to the SRO program, in talking with one of the security agents that we had prior to the program, they said that most of the activity involves students at the middle school or the intermediate school, and there's much less need for an SRO or a security agent at the high school. So, I think there's a question of should the full-time person be at Arcola rather than the high school? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a fair question. The other thing is that in the intervening 10 years, we've gone in this country from marijuana being illegal and causing a lot of jail cells to be filled up to legalizing marijuana, so that the people in Mexico that want to make money have switched over from growing marijuana to growing heroin or processing chemicals in a factory, leading to a different situation regarding overdose fatalities in this country. That's a very serious problem, and that problem is probably more prevalent as people get to ages beyond the ages of Arcola students. And at the Education Committee meeting a week or so ago, there was mention of the state getting an annual report on nursing activity in each school district, and it was noted that in Methacton, in the last school year, there were 50 concussions brought to the nurses' attention in the high school, and 35 concussions brought to the nurses' attention at Arcola. So it begs a question of where are these concussions happening? Is it people watching their cell phone as they walk into a lamppost, or is it on that football run completion where someone got hit, or it could be a lot of other places, but I think concussions in our youth are recognized as a very serious problem, and so I think it, to the extent that it's a serious problem, I think there should be some recognition of where these kids are getting their concussions.
Can you finish up, please?
Yes. There's going to be a resolution voted on next week relative to the annual technology equipment funding, and it's my understanding that while Methacton purchases that equipment, whether it's Chromebooks or whatever, but then works a deal with a bank that funds that $1 million annual resolution, so that in effect the items are leased, and then the items revert as we pay off that $1 million over 3 years. Then at the end of the 3 years, the items are turned over to that leaseholder. So purchase is not the quite all-encompassing word relative to our investment in annual investment in technology needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Candy Alaba, Eggleville. The reason I brought up about the contracts for the SRO, they've never been discussed in this room. From the very day that they were hired, after the grant ran out, the contracts were never discussed publicly. Now, the Lower Providence police officers who will be in our schools are hired as police officers in the township. They are hired under a police union contract. Now they want to bring them over into the school district under a different contract. The public, the same contract?
I just want to clarify it. The contract that we're talking about is a contract between the district and Lower Providence Township for Lower Providence to provide officers that are under the Lower Providence Township agreement for police officers as a service to us. So the police officers themselves aren't a part of a different agreement.
So they'll still be...
It's generally speaking, it says the district will pay for a uniformed police officer from this period to this period and to provide these services. That's all of our contract really says.
So the district is going to be paying the salaries as long as they're working under that contract?
I imagine the money we pay to Lower Providence goes to the salaries for those particular uniformed officers.
See, that was never explained. So in other words, the money that we're paying for the officers goes to Lower Providence Township, then they pay the officers through their contract. See, that was a very simple explanation, but that's never been made clear over the years, and it's been brought up before, because you're looking at a union contract for Lower Providence, which the Lower Providence residents are paying for that contract. Then they hear a contract for the school district, so they're thinking we're paying for, two different contracts, and that's where they see their tax money. But the money from us that's just being filtered in, that's a very simple explanation. That's all I needed to know. Because I did ask this 4 or 5 years ago, and I didn't get an answer. Thank you very much.
Oh, Brian. You stood up first.
Brian Earnshaw, Lower Providence. Question on the list of bills. There's a payment to Burke's Fire Water Restorations. And I remember from the Finance Committee that part of that related to a bus accident that was covered by insurance. Is that correct? Whose insurance covered that?
For students' insurance.
Okay, so they reimbursed us for the full amount of that damage.
I don't know about the full amount. I don't want to, their insurance was to cover the repairs. So, Mr. Vest, are you aware of whether it was the full amount or not?
We'd have to look into it.
All right.
I'd say yes.
Okay.
To speak.
And then on the SRO program, has Lower Providence ever provided details on the $300,000 charge?
They don't send us a bill for 300. I think actually Mr. Andrews was pretty accurate in terms of it's between $22,000 and $25,000 a month for the services.
Understood. But have they ever provided, because it's supposed to be like a cost reimbursement, was my understanding. So the question is, have they provided any details? Because $300,000 seems high for...
It's two officers, about $150,000 each.
I don't think their salary is $150,000, based on what I've seen in the Lower Providence budget.
It's a combination of the salaries and benefits and a combination of the car usage, and there's other, material supplies associated.
I would ask that as part of this negotiation, you ask for a detailed breakdown of that. Because to the extent they are allocating in fixed costs that they have, that doesn't make sense. Because they would have those costs regardless of whether this program existed or not. Okay, so that's one thing I would look at. And I would also, and I agree with what Mr. Andrews said, is that I would push back, and I think Mr. Roth alluded to this as well, is I would push back on this number. Because if this program is not renewed through them, they've got a $300,000 problem in their budget to fix. So the district has some leverage in this negotiation, and you should exercise that leverage. I would encourage you to. And then finally on the softball fields, I guess my confusion on this was, and I'm glad to see that you voted on this to allow an alternative if needed, but at the property committee meeting, the solicitor said, go get another supplier, and now he came back and said, don't do it. So you gotta, I don't know, I would take a look at what the solicitor is telling you and challenge some of these things, because
it's not a matter of a challenge. So here's what happened. There was a time frame associated with the original, prior to the property committee meeting, there was a timeline. They responded an hour and 53 minutes after the deadline or the time frame. Okay? And what they did is they requested more specifics associated with the scope of work. And therefore, that perpetuated the continuing discussion about getting them the specifics of the scope of work and then getting their commitment to that specific scope of work, rather than just a commitment to do the work, which is what the original commitment for that Monday afternoon was before the property committee meeting. Is that? Well, regardless, they had a timeline. There was an hour and 53 minutes or so later. We reviewed that response from their solicitor. We acted upon that. We gave them to this Monday. They responded in the appropriate time with the affirmative that they will do the work based on the scope.
Okay, but this issue has been going on for months. I think it's been alluded to a couple times. I get a general sense that there's a reluctance to hold contractors accountable in a lot of things. This instance, First Student, Zop Spector, it just seems like we go back and forth with contractors and really don't hold them to contracts, push for compliance, and it's like the district's being taken advantage of, is what I see sitting in the audience. And I could be wrong, I could be right, I don't know. So that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. He beat you to your lines. Okay, anybody else? All right. May I have a motion adjourned? Second. All those in favor? All right, thank you, everybody.